Our first guest has been sitting patiently with us for a little bit, so I want to jump right into her. We have with us Melissa Chang. I saw you here a minute ago. Melissa, you're here, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so Melissa is with the nonprofit organization Good Jobs First, which has ever since last summer was out in front in analyzing and making available all the PPP CARES Act stimulus money. Good Jobs First has other data resources, and so I've asked Melissa to come talk about how you can use their resources to track PPP loans specifically, and how you can use their other resources, such as their violations tracker, and give some tips on other sources outside of Good Jobs First, where you can start to familiarize yourself with all the data that is out there to figure out where these $9 trillion or so dollars have gone or will go. So Melissa, I want to thank you very much for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to you right now.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm really excited to be here. My name's Melissa Chang. I work at Good Jobs First as a research analyst. I primarily work on our database, COVID Stimulus Watch, tracking all of the CARES Act and American Rescue Plan and all of the related legislation and all of the money going to companies. So I'm just going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right. Oh, and the other thing that I wanted to mention is before I was at Good Jobs First, I worked at SEIU 32BJ as a campaign researcher. And I say that because I think it does bring a lot of value into this work, because I used to be the person using data like this and doing this research and trying to find all of the things that the companies didn't want you to know. And so that perspective, I think, is really valuable and helps inform the research that I do. So today I'm going to go over two of our databases. The first is Violation Tracker, which tracks regulatory violations, and then COVID Stimulus Watch. And then I'm also going to go over a database from the Pandemic Responsibility Accountability Committee, the PRAD, which has state and local funding data. And I've heard a lot of people are interested in state and local spending, so that's good. And then I'm also just going to talk briefly about how I've bridged some of the gaps in the data, as we all know that a lot of these data sets are lacking. And so just sort of giving examples about what I've done and how I sort of think about overcoming those gaps. And if you have any questions, don't feel like you have to wait till the end. Just if you have a question that comes up, feel free to interrupt. So Violation Tracker is our oldest database. It is a wide-ranging database of corporate crime and misconduct going back to 2000. So it's full of entries in which a company was found guilty or reached a settlement. And all of the entries, the minimum requirement to be included in the database is paying a fine of $5,000 or more. And the data comes from a number of official government sources at the state and federal level, and we update it quarterly. So we're adding in every quarter, adding in all of the new cases, also updating a big part of the value and violation tracker, and I'll explain a little bit more later. So just some summary stats. We have 480,000 cases from 300 different federal and state regulatory agencies, amounting to 660 billion in penalties. And in our database, we have 3,300 parent companies linked. And so the real beauty of Violation Tracker is that maybe a company has 10 different subsidiaries, very different names. And if you were looking at one subsidiary in isolation, you wouldn't know that it was associated with a larger company, and you wouldn't know that it was associated with a bunch of those other subsidiaries. And so what we do is go through these entries and make all of those relationships, make all of those connections. So you get a broader picture, like a fuller accounting of each company's track record. So just broadly, 4 categories. This isn't exhaustive, but just generally we have violations in labor, health and safety, environmental, and business corruption. So labor is wage theft, discrimination, unfair labor practice, back pay. health and safety, OSHA, nursing home violations. Environmental is exactly what it sounds like. And then business corruption, financial crimes, defrauding the government, tax evasion. If you're interested in a full accounting of all of the different groups and categories that we have, I included a link here that you can visit after. So there are two ways to access the data. The first is through pages. So this first search bar, parent companies, if you click on this, it has a list of every single parent company in our database. And so when you go through and select a parent company, it will take you to the parent page and show you everything we have for that company. And so that's a really good way if you're just trying to get like a high level view, or just doing a quick sort of search to see what's in the database. That's a really good way to start. You can also search by the parent industry, the parent headquarters, the offense group. Maybe you wanted to just see False Claims Act violations. And then you can also search by the agency as well. So if I were to go into this, this drop down of the parent summary and pick a company, say 3M, it takes you to this parent summary page, and it tells you, information about the ownership. If it's publicly traded, it'll tell you the stock ticker and industry information. And it tells you the total amount of penalties, the total amount that this company has paid in penalties since 2000. And it gives you just sort of a high level overview of the different offense groups. And on every single parent page, if you scroll down, you'll see a list of every single individual entry associated with this company. And so for 3M, the first 6 or so entries are pretty obviously 3M, those would be easy to find in a search. But this one right here, Cogent Inc., unless you knew that Cogent was affiliated with 3M, you would not find that searching on your own. And so that's the beauty of Violation Tracker and what we do. And we update these relationships quarterly. If there are mergers or acquisitions, we make sure that those connections get updated. And so if you were to click into one of these entries, so this one, the False Claims Act, and this is what an individual record page looks like. It will have more details. It will have the specific description of the violation if the agency releases that. So they were selling defective hearing protection devices to the military. It tells you, the agency and all of that good information. And then it also has the source. So we always cite our sources. And if you want to go back to the original data source, we always include the link for folks at the bottom of the page. The second option to search is just by company name, just a general search. You can search by the company name, the city and the state, the parent industry, the penalty amount, level of government, the presidential administration, ownership, or even industry code. In this work, I come across a lot of databases where I say, oh, I wish I could search by this, or I wish they had this data field as well. Our database is not like that. We try to give you as much as possible. So there are a lot of different ways to cut this data and search through it. And just a quick note about the location searches. So not all agency location information. So just keep that in mind if you are doing a search. I put a list of the agencies that are pretty good about including city and state information. So if you ever need to refer back to that, that's there. And then if you were to search a specific company, this is what the search results page looks like. You just have the list of all the companies. I searched Menzies, and then you have the parent company affiliated with it and just high-level details of these penalty amounts. And so Menzies was a company that I was actually working on organizing when I was at the union, and used this database to help down some of their regulatory history, and it is a very valuable database. And the other thing about this database is that there's a major story behind every single one of these violations. And I say that as somebody who's like responsible for one of these violations on the list, is that, this doesn't tell the whole story. So even if you get all of these penalty amounts, I would encourage folks to, go look at the source information and go look at what was going on around the situation, like what caused that violation and what the context is, because there's also a lot of dirt there that doesn't necessarily make it into the official government databases as well. And then you can also download these search results. The maximum is 10,000 records, not because we're trying to limit you, but just because our database can only handle so much. So if you need more than 10,000 records, just feel free to contact us directly and we can help you out. So I'm going to move on to COVID Stimulus Watch. If there's any questions, just feel free to let me know. So COVID Stimulus Watch is our newest database. We started this last year, obviously, when the pandemic started and all of the COVID relief bills started coming out. So we have 22 programs and 1.37 million entries. Most of them are loans, but we also have grants and contracts as well. And it covers $892 billion in spending. And part of the value of COVID Stimulus Watch is we also do that parent matching with the COVID records. So maybe a company, Melissa Chang LLC got a PPP loan and Melissa Chang LLC got an EIDL loan, and Chang LLC, my other company, got money from the provider relief, and we tried to make all of those connections as well. And we also link the databases together. We try to link COVID Stimulus Watch with violation tracker. So we try to identify the violation tracker parents in COVID Stimulus Watch so that when you click on an entry here in COVID Stimulus Watch, you'll see, oh, they have a really bad regulatory history. They paid a lot of fines in the past for certain things.
Melissa, if I could stop for just 1 second. We had a couple questions that just came in.
Oh.
On chat. I might as well just ask these right now. They're the same question. Back on the violations tracker, is the penalty charged or actually paid?
It is charged.
Charged, okay.
So how do you find out if they paid it in part or in full?
That's not something that we track. And I'm also not sure that if all of the agencies would actually report all of that information, but it's just the charge. If you wanted to find out, you'd probably have to go to the source link that would have that information.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, so.
Okay, yeah. So this is the landing page for COVID Stimulus Watch. And the easiest way to start looking through this data is clicking on this list of awards tab in the bottom left. It's really good for simple company searches or searches. And then you can also filter by accountability issue. And so this data that we're pulling in from Violation Tracker, you're able to sort the COVID Stimulus Watch data by basically those same categories. And just a note that these search results don't include refunds. We have a refunds tab right here specifically for that. It's not comprehensive because a lot of programs don't say when a company is given money back, but we try to look at SEC filings, or if there are patterns, or if a company announces that they're giving money back, we try to catalog that there. And so for this list of awards filter, if you scroll down it will show you all the awards based on whatever criteria you're filtering on. And it has these 6 accountability categories, similar to the way we group the offenses and violation tracker: employment, taxes, contracting, environmental safety, consumer protection, finance, and then CEO pay and equality. And the CEO pay is taken from SEC filings. Some companies are required to report how much they pay their CEO and how much they pay, what the median worker salary is and what that ratio is. And then we also take pre-pandemic employees from SEC. I'm sure you all remember in the beginning of the pandemic when the PPP was being rolled out and all of these other job retention programs, people were trying to figure out, who's keeping jobs and, who's laying people off. And so that's when we started doing this to give people an idea of what companies were operating like before the pandemic. And with these accountability issues, if a company is flagged as having issues in this area, these will be red. And as you'll see, all of these upstanding companies are in every single category. And so the other thing I want to note about COVID Stimulus Watch is that we used Violation Tracker as like a template to get this up and running. So it's very similar in the structure and the layout. So I won't spend as much time explaining how all of the parent and company relationships work here, but it's very similar, and you'll notice it. And so these search results, you'll have the company again, and then the parent name, and then all of those summary details for each award. And then again, you can download these search results. For this database, the maximum is 5,000, but if you need more, just feel free to shoot us an email. And so just again, differentiating between individual entry is and what the company parent summary is. So CVS Health Corp, it will tell you the specific details of this award. So they got a loan from the secondary market corporate credit facility, and it has all of the detail specific award, and then it'll have the information underneath. And then if you were to click on this parent, it would take you to this summary page with the total value of all of the awards that they've gotten, all of the accountability issues, and again, the individual records underneath. Very similar format to what's in Violation Tracker. And then again, the other ways to search using the parent summaries, or the summary pages and agencies, exactly the same as Violation Tracker, just COVID data. And then the other search option, the advanced search, it's basically the same. I just want to note that the default here is that the company searches starts with, but that's not the only way that you can search this data. So there's equals to, contains any word, contains all words exactly in the order that you put them in, or even and ends with search. So that's something that I feel like is very useful for people to play around with, that I don't think people immediately notice when they start searching. The other thing that's very helpful in these searches, and I won't get too into it, but if you're familiar with SQL or anything like that, you can do wildcard searches with our databases. So if you knew that a company started with, for example, BL, and that it ended with K, but you weren't really sure what the middle letters were, you can use that wildcard as a stand-in, and it will return all of the entries that start with BL and end with K. And then the other search you could do is this underscore, which is essentially the same, except it's just one character. So if you were just unsure of one character, it would stand in as like a blank for you when you're searching. And this also works on the Violation search. And then again, location, sort of the similar issue with Violation Tracker. Not all agencies report the location information, but most of the programs in COVID Stimulus Watch at least have state information. And then I just want to point out that the city and zip code search are equals to searches. So just keep that in mind if you're using those fields. And then we have facility ownership and congressional district and type of award you can search as well. And I just wanted to include a list of programs that have pretty good location information. So you can refer back to that if you need to look at a specific state or locality. And then Chris asked me to talk about what's new. And it's a hard question because we're always updating this database, so it feels like everything's new. But as far as the PPP, I'm sure folks remember that in December, the SBA was forced to disclose the exact loan amounts and also the loans under $150,000. Our database only includes PPP loans above $150,000. That's because there are, I think at this point, over 7 million PPP loans, and that would be a little bit overwhelming. And also part of our goal with COVID Stimulus Watch is tracking that corporate misconduct, and those smaller loans usually don't have as much of a track record or a history in Violation Tracker. But our data set, we've updated it to have the exact loan amounts and also preserve those parent linkages. The other thing with the PPP data is that it's now being released monthly. So we're updating our PPP data monthly as well. And I included a link to the actual data set. SBA had been sort of hiding this link for a while. So I wanted to just put it out there so everybody has it. But it is a lot of data. I think there are currently 10 CSV files that make up the PPP loan data set. And then towards the end of last year, we also did a study on charter schools and private schools that receive PPP loans. Again, this was only loans of $150,000, but we have that data on our site, and you can search by ownership, charter school or private school, and I'll show you in a minute on the website as well another very easy way to access that data. And then funding from the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was passed in December. So not all of the programs are sort of like a continuous sort of outpouring of money like the PPP. Some of them are just sort of like, you know, we get a wave of funding and you just give it away, and once it's done, it's done. And so the Higher Ed Emergency Relief Fund is like that. So we've just updated it with round of funding, and then the Payroll Support Program, which is for the airlines. That data is also in COVID Stimulus Watch now.
Before you go on, we do have a handful of questions in chat, and I think it makes sense to handle those now. So let me just turn it over. I'm going to call on each of you who put these questions. If you could just ask her directly, starting with Lisi.
Okay, so I know of a couple of companies here in Mississippi that applied for and received PPP loans, but when they realized they weren't qualified for them, they gave the money back. So are any of those kinds of things like noted in the database?
You're back. Hello, welcome again.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Sorry about that.
So
I wasn't running away from your question.
Yeah, Lacey, that was a tough question. You scared off the source. Thanks a lot. So we got like 4 questions. So let's take those, and then we can go back to the PowerPoint. Lacey.
Okay, I know of a couple of companies here that had applied for PPP loans and received funding for it, but after they got the money and they realized that they weren't really qualified for it, say for example, like one company that had an employee of 1, you know, she's self-employed and so she didn't really qualify for it, so she returned the money. Is that noted anywhere in the database when people return the money that they didn't think they needed or should have?
So in the PPP data sets and most of the federal data sets, they do not tell you who's returned money. And so it's been very hard to track. So, you know, when, you know, we get the January release of the PPP data set and there are entries that were in the December one that aren't there now, it's hard to determine whether, you know, this is an accounting error, maybe, you know, the company name changed in the database and we just can't find it, or maybe they actually returned the money. And so that's been really hard and very frustrating. But at the very least, I would say if a company is not in, they don't have that money, then if you saw them before and they're not there now, they probably returned that money. And so with the refunds, it's really just companies where we've seen in their SEC filing that they said, oh, you know, we're sorry, we're going to return this money, or that they've publicly announced that they're giving it all back, is really where a lot of the refund information comes from. But unfortunately, that's not in the data set. The only place that I think might have some of that information is usaspending.gov. And it's a very cumbersome database, but the way that they structure all of the data is they keep a log of every single change to a record. So even if they change the amount, even if they change Inc. to Corp in the name, they log all of those changes. And so my guess is that if a company got a PPP loan and later returned it, that would be your best bet of finding, you know, that log, that transaction of the money going back.
Okay, next up, Rachel.
I wanted to see, I mean, it sounds to me like this kind of database would not track like if a grant program was set up by a local government and a company received money that way. This is more looking at federal programs.
That's correct. And the state and local spending is next.
Okay, let me see, Christine.
Yeah, hi. I just had a question about the data. Is there a place on the website where we can get a list of all the companies that you're tracking, either through the violation tracker or the COVID stimulus tracker, and also a list of like the affiliated kind of entity names of those companies?
So you mean like a list of the parent companies and all of the records associated with them?
Yes.
Yeah, we've shared parts of that information, like for specific, industry terms or things like that. Obviously, we can't, give it all away, but if there's like a specific area like healthcare or hospitals or something like that, we can share some of that information.
All right, and finally, David.
Yeah, it was just a straightforward question going back to the violation tracker. It was mentioned that it's updated quarterly, so I just was wondering if there are actual dates to sort of keep an eye on to find out when the tracker is updated, just so that maybe we want to start poking around.
Yeah, on the landing page, there's an update log, and it has like a history of all of the updates and like the major changes that we make. And it tells you like the month. So I don't know the exact month since violation tracker isn't my database, but if you were to go there, you'll see the pattern of, when it's updated.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, one final question from Amy, then we'll get back to it. So
Yeah, I just tested it out with this school that's been in the news in Florida for telling teachers not to get vaccinated. And when I clicked on the underlying data source, it seemed to be dead. And I just wondered if that's a common link or what do you do next?
So the PPP, they just changed. The SBA had this, box, app.box.com, where they were putting all of the PPP and EIDL loans. And when I checked it about last week, it was all still there. They now have data at that link that I had in the PowerPoint. And so when I checked last week, those were both live. But since this is dead, I update it. But I always try to check and make sure that these are up to date, especially because that's where I need to go to get the most recent data. So if I go there and it's not there, then I'll change it.
okay, and a final a question from Rachana. Just clarifying, for the first question from Amy, you said this was violations, penalties charged, not actually paid, right?
Correct.
Okay, you want to clarify that. All right, so back to the presentation.
I think there was one more question.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Yamo, is that right? Or did someone already ask that one?
I think it's
about the Georgia hospitals.
Yeah, no, I didn't have a question. We had an interesting story where one of our hospitals put out a big presser to make, correct the record and say we sent back millions of dollars, and they were very anxious to make that public, and that was a story, and it was kind of unusual to have that happen. I don't know if anybody else has had that happen, but
yeah, and like I said, if the most recent version of the data set doesn't have that company, they gave the money back probably. But because I'm working with this data and always updating it, I have all of the historical, like all of the iterations of these data sets. So if you are interested in, looking to see if a company was there and isn't there anymore, I could give like an older version of the data set, maybe around the time that they issued this press release. We can look at some of the data sets in like the weeks or the month before and say, oh, this is how much money they actually got, if people are interested in something like that. So the last thing that I was just going to do very quickly with COVID is show you where you can get some of this education data. So we have a tab up here, education data, and there are sections for charter schools and private schools, and we have a map of all of the charter schools and private schools by state. And then if you click on each state, it will take you, if you click on California, it would take you to all of the charter schools in California that we identified. So that's there if folks are interested in education. Like I said, we did this towards the end of last year, so it doesn't include the newest PPP loans, and our database doesn't include loans under $150,000. So it's not comprehensive, but it is I think it's a really good start. So then I'm going to move on to the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, the PRAC. So they are an oversight committee composed of 22 inspectors general. Their mission is to promote transparency and independent oversight with all of the COVID relief spending. It's led by the Department of Justice IG Michael Horowitz, and it's become a lot more active in the last few months, and it serves as like a hub for all of the IG offices and the GAO and the PRAC reports and all of the work that, all of the oversight work that all of these agencies are doing. It's sort of, they're building it out to be like a one-stop shop for this information. So I would encourage people to visit this website. But the reason I'm showing it to you is because it provides access to pandemic relief spending, specifically state and local spending. There's also PPP spending. There's also spending and obligations just at a high level for federal agencies. So obligations are the amount that has been allocated, and then spending is how much of it they've actually spent. And here are just some links to different parts of the site, to the GAO reports and OMB reports, ongoing work. I would strongly recommend going through the GAO reports. I mean, they're very long, but there's a lot of good information there. Their whole focus is to just figure out, what's going wrong with all of these programs. And if you're willing to sort of sift through some of the pages, I mean, it's like 500 pages, but there's a lot of good information there. The OMB reports, they're measuring the impact of this spending, on things like unemployment or the economy in general. So if you're looking for some, relevant facts to back up some of your work, that's a good place to look. And then the ongoing work, I think, is also a very helpful place. It tells you exactly what the IGs are looking at right now. So the state and local spending, which is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, was $150 billion for state and local governments. So the money is generally transferred to the state government, but local governments that have a population of at least 500,000 could receive their allocation directly from the Treasury. And this is important and it's relevant, and you'll see why in a second. So I want to explain how it flows, how it drills down. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, Melissa, it goes from top to bottom. It's very easy, but not exactly. Well, not exactly. So it starts from the Treasury, and I'm using Florida as an example because that's where I'm from. So the Treasury in this case would give the money to Florida, the state of Florida, and Florida is the prime recipient. And then that money goes to the subrecipients. And so what you'll see is something like Broward County getting $3 million, and they are a subrecipient. But then you'll also see Bristol Bay Associates getting $85,000 as a subrecipient. And it's sort of like, why are counties and companies sort of like at the same level in all of this? And that's because when you see a company like this with a smaller amount, it generally falls in one of two categories. Either the company received money from a state relief program, maybe they got like a business grant or a business loan from a state relief program, or the state purchased goods or services from that company. Maybe they bought PPE, or maybe they hired them to do cleaning work or something like that. And so when you see a company at the subrecipient level, that's usually what that's an indication of. And then when you see a county here, it's just the state giving the money to the county. And what you'll find is that you're a little bit limited in the information that you get, because this is the furthest that you can drill down to. But it will tell you just generally, it'll give you a description of what the money was used for, but it won't tell you that, Broward County spent $500,000 on PPE, or they gave Melissa Chang Cleaning LLC $20,000 to clean an office building. You won't get that sort of information if you're seeing the county or like a city at the subrecipient level. So I'm just going to take you to the PRAC website. So this is the landing page. And then if you go to track the money, it's funding charts and graphs. And then Coronavirus Relief Fund is where you will find the state and local spending data. And this link is in the PowerPoint as well. So you'll see that it starts up here with the prime recipients. You'll see California, Texas, and Florida. And so once you click on Florida, what it does is it filters this subrecipient box. So now you're only looking at Florida as the prime recipient and all of the subrecipients in Florida. And you'll see that you have all of these companies getting, relatively small amounts, and then you have Allucha County getting 47 million. And so when you click on one of these companies, so Access DX Lab, it will tell you the details of the subrecipient. So this is their address, and it tells you that it was a contract for this much money. And then it also tells you the details of the project. So it'll tell you that it costs incurred to provide free COVID-19 testing. It's 50% complete, and it has a spending category. But now if you were to look at, Allucha County, it tells you the subrecipient is the county. We know that. And then the project details, it just says, housing finance, housing support. It says small business assistance, payroll, other economic support, but it doesn't tell you, who got money from this small business program, and things like that. So there's just to keep in mind that if it's a state relief program, the company specific information will likely be here. If it's like a county or a city specific relief program, you're probably not gonna be able to access that information. Unless, like I said, cities that have a population of 500,000 or more can get their money directly. And so you're starting at a level down already. And so you're able to get a little bit more information. So for example, you have state of New York here, but if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see New York City. So New York City got their money directly. And you'll see all of these companies listed here. And this is an example of where you'll actually get information on that locality's business relief program or whatever specific. It's just going to depend, like the amount of data you can get is just going to depend on if it's a state program or a county program, and whether or not, the county or city decided to take that money in themselves. But yeah, does anybody have any questions on that part? I know it's a little bit complicated.
Looks like we had a question from Hayat.
Yeah, there was a slide that mentioned that the city's population threshold was 500,000. I thought it was because Idaho has the largest city is just over 200,000. I thought Boise was on that list, but I just wanted to clarify that.
I took that fact from a CRS, a Congressional Research Service report, but it very well could be the case that Boise is on here. We can check.
I tried to check, but my computer's freezing. So.
Yeah, this data set, just a warning that it can make your computer pretty slow. I'm not seeing Idaho here. But I can look and circle back and let you know later.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so then the last thing that I wanted to go over was just giving some examples or just sharing some of the ways that I've overcome the gaps in this data. I think that for most people, the first place that they've gone is the census data, especially when it comes to the PPP, because the race and ethnicity questions weren't required. Companies didn't have to fill that out. And so it's a very unreliable data field, and a lot of the research about race and lending was done because researchers linked the PPP data to the census data, usually by zip code, sometimes by congressional district, but there are other ways, and so I just wanted to share a few of those. So the first one is the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, WARN notices. These are layoff notices. So certain companies have to notify workers and the state in advance of a layoff. And with the PPP, there was that, jobs retained field, and it didn't really give a lot of information. It didn't say anything about, how many jobs they actually saved. And there were a lot of questions about whether, the money was working, whether the money was keeping people on. And so we collected WARN notices from all of the states that disclose. I think it's 47 or 48. It's disclosed at the state level. And we used that to match against the PPP loans to see which PPP recipients had also filed a layoff notice. And we found almost 2,000 companies had submitted a notice, and that was almost, I think, like 200,000 workers. And so that's just one example. And I'll just very quickly show you. I have the Florida WARN notices here, and it tells you the company name, the date that they submitted the notice, when the layoff took place, the number of workers affected, the industry. And sometimes some states, if you're lucky, they'll actually include the letter that the company submits. So that's right here. This is actually from the company to the state saying, when the layoff's going to take place. And sometimes these letters will also have the layoff breakdown by classification, which can be very helpful as well. And then here's just a link to the report if anybody's interested. The other database that I've found to be very useful to me, found very useful in this work, especially with the healthcare, well, obviously with the healthcare companies, is the National Provider Identifier Registry. I know that I think of quite a few people said that they were interested in healthcare, and so this is like a really great database. I would recommend looking at it. And so basically every single provider has to just register with CMS, and this database, it's right here, contains a wealth of information about companies. And so if you've looked at the provider data or the hospital data, you'll notice that the names of the companies, the official names, aren't very useful. So for example, Genesis Healthcare is a very big skilled nursing home company. And all of their companies are 10 Woodland Drive or 1 Magnolia Drive, and it's just not helpful at all. And you're like, I don't know who this company really is. And this database actually does have DBAs and the names that the companies operate under. So for 10 Woodland Drive, I already have that search there. And then if you open that entry, it'll tell you they do business as Respiratory and Rehabilitation Center of Rhode Island. And that has been very helpful in sort of identifying and linking a lot of these healthcare entities to their parents and the larger healthcare systems. The other thing that's useful here is that it tells you the authorized official, the person that registered the company, and a lot of times you'll see these names over and over again, and that is also a good clue when you're looking for ownership as well. And there's another thing that's very valuable about this database that I haven't told anybody about this yet, mostly because no one has asked, but Also, this data set, if you actually go to the download and download the actual full NPI file, there is some ownership information and like system affiliation information in there. The only problem is that this is a very big data set. I think it's like over 10 gigabytes. It has millions and millions of records, and I think almost like 400 columns. So I don't think that it's like a sort of Excel friendly file, but if you have the capabilities of opening bigger files, I would recommend looking at this file for if you're looking for ownership and things like that as well. The other useful sort of data set that I've found is from HHS, Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality Hospitals. There are so many government agencies, and I think I learn about a new one every single day. This one has a hospital compendium, so they have gone through and found all of the hospital systems in the US, and they collect data on, number of doctors, number of nurses, number of facilities, is it investor owned, all of this very useful information when doing healthcare research. And then they also have a hospital system link file, so linking individual hospitals to their broader parents. And then they also have a group practice system link file as well. This is their website. So they did this in 2018, but they update it regularly. So they had a March 2021 update. And so they are looking at it and making sure it's fairly accurate. And if you're looking for ownership information, this is a really great place to start. Example is the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council. So they have current and historical financial and structure information on banks and other financial institutions. So branches, who's the ownership, like, is there a holding company, is it a credit union, is it a bank, is it a savings bank. And I have been looking into lending recently, and so that's why I've been here. And so this is the website, and this is just the about. So it tells you like the financial data and the hierarchy and some of the history, mergers and acquisitions and things like that. And so that's also a very useful data source. And the underlying thread, or like the common thread in all of this, is that these are all obviously government databases. And so when I'm doing this research, when I'm looking for companies, I try to think like this company, and what do I need to do to be in business? Like, what do I need to do to be in business as a healthcare provider? Oh, I have to go register with the government, and try to think about all of the points that a company would come into contact with government. Because when they come in contact with government, they're most likely reporting information, and that information, you have access to it, like you should be able to get it. And so that's sort of the way that I think about it. Is it an airline contractor? What do I need to do to be an airline contractor? I have to go apply to the airport for a permit. And you can get all of this information by sort of thinking about where a company needs to tell the government things. And these are just some examples of how that's helped me in this work. And that's it.
Well, it's great resources for I mean, a lot of it is easily accessible, and then also some of it, if you have data support, they might be able to help you with some of it. And a lot of those big databases that she was talking about, with the 400 fields of information and 10 gigabytes, that might be the kind of thing you can have a data kind volunteer help you with if you don't have institutional support. So we had, let me see, one question from Alex. Alex, you want to ask that one? Then I'll see if there's any other questions.
Yes, specifically with the WARN notices. I was unfamiliar with them. Do you know if they're required in at-will work states?
So it's a federal law, so all states have to collect WARN notices. Some states have stricter requirements. So like with the federal requirement, it's like, you have to have X amount of employees in order to be covered under the WARN. But states like California have like a lower threshold and sort of cover more companies with the reporting. I know New York is one of those as well. I think that has like a broader range of what they require, of the companies that they require, but all states have to collect this data.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we have a few minutes. Any outstanding questions? You'll get full access to the PowerPoint with all of those great links on there. That'll be posted to our website later today or over the weekend, as well as the transcript and the video. So lots of great resources to go back to. Well, Melissa, I want to thank you very much, and thank you and Good Jobs First for all the good work you've done compiling all this information. And Melissa, thank you very much.